Undercover boss gets coffee, but waitress's 7 words change everything. Wednesday morning. The air is still crisp. The city has just woken up and dew still clings to the roadside trees. At the corner where 8th Street meets Lincoln, the Morning Grace branch of the New Dawn Caf chain has been open since 6 a.m. No need for flashy signs or catchy music, just the scent of freshly ground coffee and the soft laughter of a few regulars are enough to draw in passersby. Michael Foster, 50 years old, wears a gray coat, an old baseball cap, and thin-rimmed glasses. He looks like any middle-aged man waiting for a meeting. But he's not waiting for anyone. He's observing. His chosen table is right by the large glass window. Sunlight streams in, casting a gentle glow. On the table sits a strong espresso, barely touched. Beside it, a worn notebook with frayed corners. No one in the caf knows that this man is the founder of the entire chain they're working for. He prefers to observe in silence, from how customers react to each drink to the look in employees' eyes when they turn away from the counter. And at that exact moment, he hears something not on the menu. Today's tips probably won't even cover the last bus. The voice is quiet, not directed at him. It sounds more like a whispered thought, said aloud for no one but herself. Michael freezes. He looks up. The voice belongs to Elena, a young woman behind the bar pouring milk into a latte. Petite build, her hair tied neatly behind her head. The smile on her lips remains steady as she thanks the customer. But in that moment, he sees her eyes. It takes him a few seconds to realize what's missing strength. Not just the fatigue of a long shift, but the slow erosion that comes from knowing no matter how hard you try, it will never be enough. Michael glances around the caf. About 8 tables are occupied. A group of college students laughs in the left corner. A man types away on a laptop near the end of the bar. 2 elderly folks read newspapers. Everything looks normal. Too normal. But that's what makes him shiver. Because sometimes the greatest injustices are hidden inside the most familiar places. He turns back to his espresso, but doesn't take another sip. His ears now filter every sound around him, not as a CEO, but as someone searching for a voice lost in the crowd. A woman pulls a $5 bill from her wallet to tip Elena directly. But before she can hand it over, another employee, taller, wearing a badge that reads Brian, shift leader, steps in. He gently takes the bill and says, "Thanks, just leave it here." He places the money in a large glass jar in the center of the counter, already filled with crumpled bills. Elena presses her lips together. She says nothing. But Michael notices her fingers grip the tray just a little tighter as she walks away. A few minutes later, as Elena walks past his table, Michael gives a slight nod the way regulars do. She returns a smile, the kind he taught in their original training sessions, friendly enough to feel welcoming, but never too much to seem fake. And then he spots something small, very small, that no one else would notice: a bandage on her thumb with a red edge. A patch of peeled skin beneath, like a minor burn or friction injury. In that moment, a memory rushes back to Michael. It's 1998. He was washing cups behind the bar of a small caf. His own hands had blistered from scalding water and cleaning chemicals, but he was just a college kid on a summer job. Elena, she's trying to survive on tip money. Would you like anything else? Elena asks, walking up to him. I'll have a slice of the baked tart and some hot water for tea, Michael replies. His voice slow. He wants to hear more. Not just from her, but from this caf. From the tiny details only someone who has worked every job would notice: the chipped edge of a tray from being slammed too hard. The rolled-up rug near the walkway, clearly left uneven because the servers had no time to fix it. A male employee behind the bar, hearing Elena say guest at table 3, wants more tea, sighs loudly again. You're like the main server today. Elena says nothing. She just lowers her head and gets the hot water. Michael sees it all, not with the eyes of a boss, but with the heart of someone who's lived a life like Elena's. And in that moment, he knows something is wrong here. Not in the coffee or the service, but in the way people are being forced to endure in the very place that was meant to support them. He opens his notebook, but writes nothing. Because for the first time in months, Michael feels it's not the system that needs change. It's the way the people at the top have stopped listening. Elena returned with the tea tray and a slice of tart. As she placed them on the table, her hand trembled slightly. No one noticed, but Michael did. And he couldn't ignore it. Morning at morning, Grace unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. The calf sat at a busy intersection where office workers stopped by in a rush before work students reviewed notes and tourists sought a moment of peace in the bustling city. The walls were covered in reddish-brown bricks. A few small hanging plants dangled above. The morning light filtered through the large windows, casting the shadows of tables and chairs onto the tiled floor. The atmosphere was warm but not calm.
Something was cracking beneath the rhythm.
The coffee grinder hummed steadily in the corner. Cups clinked. Orders called from the kitchen came at a regular pace. But to Michael, each sound was a signal. A string of invisible clues, and if you listened long enough, you'd feel something wasn't right. He sat in the usual spot of a passing customer between the bar and the entrance right behind a small cactus plant. One hand held a still steaming cappuccino. His eyes scanned the space like a hidden camera that never switched off. Elena, the lead waitress, was the first to catch his attention. A young woman, petite hair tied neatly in a high ponytail, always smiling. But something in her eyes kept him from looking away. It wasn't sadness, it was the look of someone who had learned to pretend they're okay after too many times of not being okay. Every time she poured coffee or cleared a table, she turned her back slightly from her coworkers, as if avoiding them. Michael noticed that her right hand was often tucked into her apron pocket. And when she delivered a tray, her wrist bent slightly in a stiff, guarded way. Maybe an injury. Or maybe a defensive habit after too many times of being hurt. Bryce, the morning shift lead, stood behind the counter like a commander. His eyes never met the customers. They only landed on staff. When an order was called from upstairs, Bryce didn't even turn around. He just gave a cold command table 7. Elena, go. No one replied. No one reacted. Elena nodded lightly and walked off like a wind-up clock set into motion. Franklin, the older cook, was the first person Michael tried to chat with. But when Michael asked busy morning, Franklin just replied flatly normal, then turned back into the kitchen, avoiding eye contact. That cautious look wasn't from a stranger. It was the look of someone who had seen wrong but didn't have the power to stop it. At the corner table near the window, Mr. Harold, a man about 70, was sipping a black coffee and reading the paper. Michael recognized him instantly. One of the regular loyalists logged in the system. As Michael glanced toward Elena, who was carrying a tray to table 2, Mr. Harold folded his newspaper, didn't look up and murmured, "She's still hanging on because she needs the job." It's not about passion anymore. That line hit Michael like a long-held breath finally released. The tone was calm but full of buried discontent, like a silent verdict cast upon those pretending everything's fine. A group of customers just left a table near the bar. A middle-aged man handed Elena a tip and said, "For you only. You've been great." But Bryce stepped in from nowhere, took the bill, and said, "Thanks. We collect all tips to split evenly." Elena said nothing, just smiled softly and turned away. But Michael saw her fingers tighten around the edge of the metal tray until the knuckles turned pale white. A few minutes later, Michael spotted Elena standing by the counter corner, quietly counting her tips in the palm of her hand. She turned, quickly stuffed them into her apron pocket, and looked around as if she had just done something forbidden. A mini twist was forming. Michael pretended not to see. But he recorded it, not with a camera, but with memory. The small gestures full of unspoken meaning. The words no one wanted to say out loud. And the fearful glances, none of which could ever be measured in a performance review. Another male customer stepped up to the bar, pointed to his espresso, and said, "I asked for no sugar." "This clearly has syrup," Bryce scoffed. "Then I guess it's whoever brought it out." His eyes flicked toward Elena. Michael followed his gaze. Elena returned to the bar. Her face flushed slightly red, but she still smiled and apologized to the customer. No response to Bryce. No excuse. Just acceptance. The air suddenly felt heavy. Not because anyone raised their voice, but because for those watching like Michael, the question had become clear: what's really going on in this calf that looks so normal? Michael tapped the table 3 times, an old habit of his whenever he knew something needed to be investigated. He had no proof, but he had his instincts, the kind that 30 years of leading a company had taught him to trust. This isn't just a story about a calf. It's about how a person, no matter how hard they try, can still be crushed by the very place they once believed would be their safe haven. And what troubled Michael most wasn't the withheld tips. It was the feeling that Elena was learning how to survive, not daring to dream of truly living anymore. Around 9 a.m., the morning rush had begun to fade. Michael ordered a plate of toast and a mint tea, intentionally slowing down to observe. From behind the counter, Elena quietly sank onto a small stool tucked against the wall. She wasn't on break. She was breathing. Her shoulders rose and fell so quickly it was impossible to hide the exhaustion. Another employee, the curly-haired barista named Kyle, passed by and whispered no lunch break again. Elena didn't lift her head. She just gave a small shake, and a moment later she muttered in a hoarse voice, "Just wish I could get through one day without having to fight for every dollar in tips. Just to survive." That sentence, as soft as wind slipping through a crack in the door, made Michael freeze. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a clear sign that the system he once believed in was rotting from within. He put down his cup and silently watched Elena, like a song that suddenly changed key without warning. The first mini twist appeared just minutes later. Mr. Harold, the elderly regular who always sat by the entrance, walked in slower than usual. When he saw Michael still seated, he took the table beside him as if looking for someone to talk to. "I noticed you've been watching that girl Elena pretty closely," he said softly. "She's a good one, tried to get a full-time position once, but didn't get it." Michael asked why not. Harold shrugged. "Too inflexible with hours," that's what young Bryce said. But to be honest, she's just not the type to go along with the flow. The phrase "go along with the flow" made Michael's skin crawl. It didn't appear in any HR manual, but it was heard often in places where power was misused. Bryce, the shift lead, walked out from the kitchen just as Elena was finishing up 2 cappuccinos. He didn't carry a tray, didn't help clear tables, but his eyes scanned the calf like a control radar. When a young female customer left 2 tip coins beside Elena's water glass, Elena simply gave a small nod of thanks. But just as she stepped forward to collect the coins, Bryce intercepted. "Put it in the shared jar," he said, not even looking at her, and dropped the 2 coins into the glass jar at the center of the counter. Elena pressed her lips together. Not a word in protest. But for a fleeting second, something in her eyes looked like it had been taken away. Michael saw it all. He didn't act immediately, but in his mind the pieces were starting to connect. Kyle, the young barista, finished his shift and sat resting in the back courtyard. Michael pretended to go out for a smoke and sat beside him. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "Not even 2 months. But I'll probably quit soon." Why the answer didn't come right away. Kyle hesitated, then looked around as if afraid someone might overhear. "There were times I saw customers leave separate tips, but then it all got lumped together. And after that, those who were on the manager's good side got a bigger share." "Have you told anyone about this?" Kyle shook his head. "We don't dare. Anyone who speaks up, they're the first to be let go." Meanwhile, Elena kept working as if she had never uttered a word of complaint. But anyone watching long enough would notice the strain in her every movement. Her hands no longer held cups as steadily as before. Her voice stuttered slightly when reading out orders. And then near the end of the shift, when staff began receiving preliminary pay summaries for the latest work period, Elena stood silently outside the manager's office door. The white sheet in her hand, just a number, but it looked like it carried a blow straight to her dignity. Michael saw her hesitate, then sit down on the back steps behind the calf. No one noticed. She covered her face with her sleeve, but her shoulders, they were trembling.
Something was breaking.
Not inside her, but inside the very system he once believed was fair. And from that moment, Michael stopped just watching. He had decided to step in. Michael didn't rush. He didn't interrogate or accuse. He simply stayed a little longer like an old customer who adored the place. And slowly the pieces began to surface from quiet moments no one else noticed. At a table in the back, a part-time staffer was polishing cups. Michael quietly stepped over, smiled tough morning. Young man paused, then sighed and lowered his voice. This place, if Bryce likes you, you get the good shifts. You get tips evenly split. If not, you're stuck with the dead hours. It wasn't a complaint. It was a map. And Michael understood if he wanted to know what was really going on, he had to follow whispers like these. Another worker, a short-haired girl wiping down the pastry trays when asked gently how do they manage to split tips fairly here, she lowered her head and replied softly, even the tips customers give directly have to go into the shared jar. But after the shift, Bryce is the one who tallies it all. How much each person gets only he knows. Then she glanced around. Talk too much and you won't be on the schedule tomorrow. Michael gave a small nod. No more questions. He understood in places ruled by silent power, the truth often hides behind fear. But right then, as he turned back to his table, a sight made him stop in his tracks. Elena. Still the same girl.
Still the wrinkled apron.
Still the worn-out shoes. But this time she wasn't standing. She was crouched low behind the pastry counter, one hand gripping a chair leg for balance. In her hand was a paper, the preliminary pay slip. Michael didn't move. He just watched. Her shoulders trembled slightly. A breath came out fast and shallow. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. Not because she didn't want to cry, but because she'd learned how to hold it in. Customers still came and went. Bryce was still directing the flow. But in that corner, a woman was breaking apart piece by piece. No one noticed. No one. But Michael saw. And through his eyes, the viewers began to see too. A quiet, emotional drop. No dramatic music. No spotlight. Just one person suffering in silence. And another who could no longer stay silent. Michael pulled out his notebook. Not to write in it, but to stop his hands from curling into fists. Moments later, he stood up, not loudly. No announcement. But his eyes had changed, and his steps directed toward the counter marked the beginning of a turning point no one in the caf could have predicted. Under the hazy glare of the late noon sun, the cup of hot tea in Michael's hand still gave off a soft steam. But the air inside Morning Grace Caf had completely shifted. He stepped away from his seat, each footstep slicing through the caf's normal rhythm. At the counter, he set his tea down, not hurriedly, but firmly. Excuse me, he said in a deep voice. Who's responsible for distributing tips here? Bryce, still standing behind the counter, looked up. There was a flicker of unease in his eyes, something about the quiet confidence in the man's tone. He raised an eyebrow, arms crossed. And you are Bryce asked, half curious, half defiant? Michael didn't answer right away. He wasn't looking at Bryce. He was watching Elena. She was wiping a table across the room, a faded cloth in her hand, her movements slow and drained. Her hands still trembled slightly, maybe from exhaustion, maybe from holding back too much. A customer had just left a double tip on the table. But Elena didn't smile. She just folded the bill, slipped it into her apron pocket, and bowed her head to continue working. Michael shook his head gently. Then he spoke. Quietly, clearly. I'm just someone who can't understand why a worker doing her full shifts, always on time, still has to walk home. He looked Bryce in the eye. And why she cries when she sees her pay slip. No one spoke. The sound of the coffee grinder suddenly stopped. A regular, stirring his cappuccino, paused. A staffer at the side counter froze mid-wrap on a pastry bag. The entire caf held its breath as if the room had been drained of all sound. Elena stood still. The towel in her hand was still damp. But this time she wasn't wiping anymore. She looked toward the counter.
Her eyes met Michael's.
A look only those who have known silent exhaustion would understand. No explanation needed. No complaint necessary. Bryce didn't seem to understand what was happening.
He shrugged, his voice rigid.
If she has any issues, she can report directly to the manager. Here, everyone follows the rules. Michael turned to him, but his eyes were no longer quiet. Now, it was the presence of a man about to speak a truth, one that no one could stop. What rule, he asked slowly, allows a shift lead to collect tips privately, then merge them into a shared jar without any transparency? Bryce opened his mouth to reply, but Michael didn't give him the chance. What rule, he continued, lets you erase a worker's name from the official schedule even though she clocks in every single week? A chill swept through the room. Not from the temperature, but from something cracking layer by layer like tiles splitting underfoot.
A young staffer at the side counter lowered his head.
Another, the new barista, glanced at Elena, then quickly looked away.
Someone had just felt guilt.
Bryce finally raised his voice. I'm just doing things the way they've always been done. Nobody has complained. Michael reached into his wallet, pulled out his staff ID, and slowly set it on the counter. Well, someone is complaining now, he said. And I believe the opinion of the founder of New Dawn Caf might just be worth hearing. No shouting, no fanfare, but the caf shook. Elena, now resting the cloth on the table, still stood there, but her eyes had changed. No longer the look of someone avoiding attention, but something closer to hope. Michael said nothing more. He turned around. His gaze passed across each face, not to accuse, but to show them he was watching. And this time, he wouldn't look away. From a whispered 7-word sentence that morning, the dust blanketing this system was beginning to lift. And the small caf on the corner, once settled into routine, was about to witness something no one thought would happen on a morning like any other. You might sit there and think I'm just a customer. But for Michael Foster, there is no such thing as a normal morning if someone is forced to choose between working and surviving. And the story is only beginning. Michael reached into his coat pocket, not rushing, not speaking, just the soft click of a leather wallet opening. Then a high-level staff ID raised slowly to Bryce's eye level. Michael Foster, he said, eyes locked on Bryce. Founder of the New Dawn Caf chain. A heavy silence fell over the entire caf. The cappuccino just placed on the next customer's table was still steaming. But no one touched it. All eyes were on the counter where a truth was now rising to the surface, undeniable. Bryce blinked. His lips moved as if still not fully processing what he'd just heard. Michael turned to the tech assistant at the side counter. Show me the internal camera footage. This morning. Table 3. The young man hesitated, then nodded, typing commands into the monitor. The footage appeared not sped up, not edited. Bryce holding the tip a customer had handed directly to Elena, then pointing toward her. But instead of giving it to her, he quietly slipped the bill into the shared tip jar behind the counter. No explanation. Elena said nothing. She turned away and continued working as if it were something all too familiar. Not a single word, but everyone saw.
Michael pointed at the screen.
This is the first incident. Then he pulled up a second image, a photo of the staff schedule posted in the break room, snapped quietly this morning when he had gone into the employee restroom. The angle was slightly off, but clear enough to see that the names for the morning shifts, repeated week after week, had not included Elena's for the past 3 months. A nearby worker covered her mouth. Another looked down at his shoes. Bryce began to speak, but his voice faltered. I'm just doing what this branch has always done. That's the local rule. Michael looked up. No need to raise his voice. No. Rules come from me. And I've never written anything that gives anyone the right to invent their own rules. Especially rules that suffocate someone's effort, dedication, and dignity. Bryce fell silent. Elena was standing in the corner of the caf. She didn't move, as if she still couldn't believe this was really happening. Her hands clenched the damp cloth so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Michael turned to her. His voice softened, no longer the voice of a powerful CEO, but of a human being who saw something wrong and chose not to look away. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for what you did wrong, but for what we allowed to go wrong for too long." Elena said nothing, but tears began to fall, not from sadness, but because, for the first time in months, someone truly saw her, and the calf Morning Grace stood still as a witness. No more hiding places, no more shells to cover anything. Everything was laid bare, and from here on it would either change or collapse. Under the fading light creeping over the rooftops of downtown Morning Grace, once just a tucked-away corner in the city's rush, had transformed in just a few hours. Bryce was suspended that very day. No excuses. No chance for internal handling. A direct call from the headquarters was made right after Michael stepped out of the employee room. Elena was invited into the break room for the first time not to wait for a shift, but to sign an official contract along with a confirmation letter for 3 months of back pay. Inside the envelope was also a handwritten note from the main office with one line, "We're sorry it took us this long to see you." Michael didn't announce it. He didn't need to. He simply sat across from Elena, handed her the envelope, then stood up. But the system changed for real. At the internal meeting that afternoon, Michael made the decision a real-time tip-sharing software tracking every bill, every server would be implemented at Morning Grace immediately.
Staff would be given access to monitor their share.
No more vague glass jars. No more even split by guesswork. Next to the espresso machine where Bryce used to supervise each morning shift, a new wooden plaque was nailed to the wall. No cup of coffee should be brewed with tears. No logo. No name. Just a timely reminder placed exactly where it needed to be. Once everything was settled, Michael stepped out into the windless afternoon. He didn't wave goodbye. Didn't ask to be seen off. The door opened gently. The bell rang softly behind him, then closed. But before he walked away, he paused. From outside the foggy glass, he saw Elena sitting at a small table usually reserved for regulars. In front of her was a simple late breakfast: eggs, toast, a few slices of fruit, and a cup of black coffee. For the first time since she started working, this was a meal she didn't have to pay for herself. And she didn't have to sneak it from the kitchen. Elena was eating slowly, as if savoring every moment. No more glancing around. No more habitual lowering of her head every time someone walked by. Only a smile, genuine, whole, reflected under the golden afternoon light spilling through the window. Michael watched for a few more seconds, then gave a small nod. Not to anyone else, but to himself. Because some things can't be fixed with budgets. Can't be solved with reports. But by sitting down, listening, and doing something about it, one person just got their dignity back. A system just got rebuilt from the inside. And a cup of coffee finally was no longer brewed with tears. Only with fairness and kindness.